Well, hello there. Social 30-1 going to talk today about Canadian government, Canadian democracy. Good nickname for Canadian government is responsible government. So Canada's government is known as a responsible government. You'll see why at the end of the lesson today. It's also a good example of what we call a parliamentary system. Responsible government and a parliamentary system. You'd be surprised how much people don't know about the way Canadian government even works. So you're going to learn a lot today. And then at the end, we'll come back and we'll evaluate Canadian democracy. Just how democratic are we? And so, as I teach you about the way our government works, be thinking to what degree does this fit Abraham Lincoln's definition of democracy? To what degree are we a government of the people, by the people, and for the people? So, where do I start here? Let's go to the bottom of my diagram. The voters, Canadians that are eligible to vote, are 18 years and older, will vote in Canadian federal elections. And what we're doing is we're voting for MPs that will sit in the Canadian House of Commons. Our House of Commons is in Ottawa, capital of Canada, and it is our parliament. It's where our elected parliament sits, the House of Commons. You've probably seen it on TV and then quickly change the channel because you're bored. But that is the House of Commons. In the House of Commons, there are literally and physically 338 seats. And that's important. 338 seats. And we basically vote in federal elections and decide who is going to get one of those seats for that term of the government that wins. So that's what we do in a federal election. We vote for MPs, members of parliament, that will fill those 338 seats. By the way, just so you know, Canada is also divided up into 338 constituencies or ridings. And what that means is that when you vote in a Canadian federal election, depending on what riding you live in, you're voting for the person that's going to win the seat for that riding. So my riding happens to be Calgary Fish Creek. So when I vote in an election, whoever wins the riding that I live in gets that seat in the House of Commons. And usually in Calgary, they're conservative from the Conservative Party, but they don't have to be. So understand that MPs run, to get elected for a constituency or a riding and get the seat, but they also run according to a political party. And so Canada's big political parties, as you know, are the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc Québécois, and maybe well, definitely to a lesser degree, the Green Party. And so we vote in an election and we vote for someone to win our constituency and they get a seat in the House of Commons. I hope you're with me so far. Half of 338 is 170. And so if your political party gets 170 or more of those 338 seats in the House of Commons, they form what is called a majority government because they've won a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. And that's the best kind of government to win if your party is running for political office because it basically means you can't do whatever you want, but you can do almost whatever you want as long as it doesn't violate the Constitution, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the courts approve of what you're trying to do. So the most effective government that you would want if you were running for government would be a majority government. You get 170 or more of the 338 seats. The second kind of government you can get in Canada is a minority government. And this is when your political party wins more seats than any of the other parties, but didn't get to the 170 seats in the House of Commons. And that's the government we've got right now. The Liberals did win the last election, but they didn't get a majority of the seats. So they're a minority government. And what that means is that when they try to pass policy legislation or a new budget or bill, they've got to get other parties to support them to push that vote through in the House of Commons. Before a budget can be carried out, before a bill or a law can be carried out, you need over half of the MPs in the House of Commons to vote in favor of that bill. And so if you've got a majority government, and assuming that every member of your party that is an MP of your party votes for what you want, you can pass basically whatever policy you want. But when you've got a minority government and you've got less than the 170 seats, you've got to go to other parties and get their support. So, for example, today, Justin Trudeau, if he wants to pass a law or a budget, he may need to go to the NDP and say, listen, I want to pass this law. Will you vote with me on it? He might go to the bloc and say, look, I want to pass this law. Will you vote with me on this law and push it forward? He needs them to support it. He might need to amend or adapt or change that law or budget to get them to vote for it. And someone could say that is actually more democratic than having the majority government. If you're still confused, look at it this way. Pretend that I'll come to that after. It's too soon for that now. The third brand of government is a coalition government. And these ones are very rare in Canada. This means that, two or more parties unite their votes together and they form a government. So it means that no political party was really a clear-cut winner. And so you might have to join two or three political parties together till they get to the 170 seats or votes, and then they can form a government. Email me if you're unsure of this, and I'll try to make more sense of it as we go on. It's hard doing it online, just talking about it. So bear with me now. So I hope you understand how we pick MPs in the House of Commons. Let's talk about the cabinet now. So the House of Commons and the Senate together make up the legislature. Let's keep going here. The House of Commons makes up part of the legislature. We'll talk about the Senate after. We still haven't got to how we pick the Prime Minister yet, and that's the next thing we're going to do right now. The Prime Minister is also an MP. The Prime Minister is the leader of the political party that got the most seats in the House of Commons. But he had to win a seat in the House of Commons. So the Prime Minister himself will have one of those 338 seats. And it's happened before where the leader of the political party that won the election, the Prime Minister actually didn't even win his seat. And so what they do is actually quite draconian. They approach an MP that did win a seat, kick him out of it, and give that seat to the Prime Minister. It's rare, but it can happen. And so Justin Trudeau had to win his seat in the House of Commons. And because he's the leader of the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party won the election, they got more seats than any other party, he becomes the next Prime Minister. So when you look at it that way, um, even if you voted for the Liberals, you never really voted for Justin Trudeau directly, unless you lived in his riding. If you lived in Justin Trudeau's riding, you directly voted for him in the election. Otherwise, if you wanted him to be the prime minister, you had to vote for the Liberal Party. And that's what usually happens in Canadian politics. Your parents, most people usually vote for the political party. And they may not even be aware of the person in their jurisdiction that is running for political office. They just know that they always vote Liberal or that they always vote Conservative. So really in Canada, we vote for the party first. And we may not even know the individual who is winning the seat from our jurisdiction, constituency, or riding. And that's not a bad thing. It's just how it goes in Canada. But that's how we pick our prime minister. He leads the party. If the party wins the election, he becomes the prime minister. By the way parties pick their leaders before an election is through an internal party vote. So if you are a member of the Conservative Party of Canada, you get to pick the next Conservative leader. Uh, the current one, Andrew Scheer, is stepping down. So the Conservatives this spring, probably this summer, are going to internally have an election, and members of the Canadian Conservative Party will pick the new leader of the Conservative political party. and he'll run in the next federal election against the Liberals and the other parties too. But that's how that works. And it doesn't take a lot to be the member of the party. You apply, you join the party, and you get to vote for the next leader. You go to the conventions and so on. But that is how we pick a prime minister. So we don't directly vote for the prime minister. It's done indirectly in Canada. The prime minister will in turn pick his cabinet. So his cabinet members are, the upper echelon of the political party. Cabinet members also have to have seats in the House of Commons. And the cabinet kind of is like his inner cohort, his inner circle, his group of experts that advise him and help him run the government. So in Canada, we call the cabinet members ministers. So there's a minister of finance, there's a minister of foreign affairs, there's a minister of national defense, and so on. They are all cabinet members, the inner clique of the Canadian government. And this is where true power really lies in Canadian politics between the prime minister and the cabinet. Being a constitutional monarchy, or the remnants of one, we still recognize the crown, so the Queen, and the Queen is recognized through the Governor General of Canada. It's more of a symbolic role than anything, but technically, the Governor General has to approve bills, legislation, budgets, and so on. They never say no. But we never overthrew the monarchy like the Americans did, so we still recognize the crown, the queen, through the governor general. Other thing we should point out is the Canadian Senate. So the Senate is appointed by the prime minister and confirmed by the governor general. The Senate is the upper body of our legislature or our House of Commons. Canada is what is called a bicameral system. And what we mean by bicameral is that we have two levels to our legislature. We have the House of Commons, which is the first level, and we have the Senate, which is the second level. Don't get too concerned about the Senate. The Senate's job is to review bills and laws that come out of the House of Commons and give them approval. So as you probably know, before a bill can become a law in Canada, it's got to go through 3 readings. The Senate gives it one of those readings. The idea being the Senate gives things a sober, calm, second look to just make sure that we want to pass that law or budget. And you may not be aware of this, but they can become very heated and debated in the House of Commons. So, when they meet, they can yell at each other. Sometimes they even swear at each other as they debate bills and budgets and so on. And so by creating the Senate, the idea was being you would have people removed from these heated debates in the House of Commons, people removed from that atmosphere that could calmly and rationally think about things. Do we really want to do this? That's the role of the Senate. I was watching TV, and this actually happens not frequently, but enough to be common. In places like South Korea, they actually get into fist fights in their parliament. That's how heated these debates can become. Now, it doesn't get like that in Canada, but you can maybe understand a bit more why we need a Senate to avoid the heat and climate of something like the House of Commons. Downside of the Senate is that there isn't a lot of accountability in that you don't vote for the Senate. The governor general and prime minister pick them, they appoint them. So there's been a lot of calls for Senate reform in Canada. I remember a few years back in the 90s, a particular senator was getting paid his salary and qualifying for pensions, and he wasn't even living in Canada. He lived in Mexico for years and hadn't been back to Canada for quite some time and was still a senator. They've cleaned it up since then, but there's still a lot of pushes and calls for reform to the Senate. Should it be more accountable? As you'll learn tomorrow, in America, they vote for their senators. We don't in Canada. The Prime Minister picks them. Senate, House of Commons together make up the legislature. Governor General, Prime Minister make up the executive. We haven't talked about the judiciary yet, but that is the Supreme Court of Canada. So the Supreme Court of Canada, these are judges appointed by the Governor General, but that appointment is advised and recommended by the Prime Minister. And the role of the Supreme Court of Canada is to review laws and bills and interpret them as to whether or not they're constitutional or unconstitutional. And if they're not constitutional, the government has to change those laws and bills before they can become legal. So what you've got are three branches that separate power. You've got a legislative branch that can propose laws. You've got an executive branch that can make the law happen, make it become a law. And you've got a judicial branch that can interpret the law and decide whether or not it's constitutional or unconstitutional. A few more items that I got to talk about before we're done here. In Canada, federal elections must happen at minimum every 5 years, but they can happen anytime. They can call an election. Usually they call them after 4 years. An election can be called after 3 years. An election can be called after 1 year or even a couple of months. Now, they're not going to be that drastic. Elections are very expensive. They cost millions of dollars. By rule of thumb, they happen about every 4 years in Canada. And another thing that makes us unique from America is that a Canadian prime minister can run as many times as they want, um, unlimited terms. So, if you can keep on winning, prime ministers can keep coming back and win 4 or 5 elections in a row. Makes me think of the Chrétien dynasty of the 1990s and early 2000s. He just kept winning, so he just kept coming back. There's no fixed amount of times you can run and win as a Canadian prime minister. We talked about the 5 year term. We talked about limited terms. We talked about the indirect vote for our prime minister. A really big one that we'll get to now is party discipline in Canada. And this is the tricky one. I'll talk about party discipline and the vote of non-confidence at the same time. In Canada, the way we really achieve accountability, and this is important, so listen close. Think back to the Prime Minister having to have a seat in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister had to come out of the House of Commons. He had to win a seat in that House of Commons. And because he came out of the House of Commons, he's responsible to the House of Commons. And what I mean by that is this, and it's critical and really important. If a Prime Minister tries to pass a bill into a law, and the House of Commons votes against his bill or law, he's just been given a vote of non-confidence. He's got to immediately call a new election. Basically, he's lost his job. So once again, if Justin Trudeau tries to pass a bill into a law and more MPs in the House of Commons vote against the bill than vote for the bill, he's just been given a vote of non-confidence. He's got to call a new election, and he can run again as prime minister if his party wants him to be the leader, but he's got to call a new election. And it's just how we ensure accountability. It's what prevents the prime minister from trying to do something really undemocratic. If he did, two things would happen. If he tries to pass an undemocratic law, first of all, you would think the House of Commons would vote against it and vote it down. They'd say, no way, can't make that a law. And number two, in doing so, they would also have given them a vote of non-confidence. He's got to call a new election. They happen not a lot, but frequently enough that we can't call them anomalies. Here are some examples of Canadian votes of non-confidence in our government. The latest being Stephen Harper in 2011 was given a vote of non-confidence because he refused to give details about a budget that he was about to pass. So how can MPs vote on a budget if you're holding back certain details of that budget? At least that was the accusation. So in 2011, Stephen Harper was given a vote of non-confidence, had to call a new election. Um, on this occasion, he ran as prime minister again and won that next election. But you don't always win. So there is a huge feature of accountability in Canadian government. Now, along with that, let's talk about party discipline. Theoretically, votes of non-confidence should be able to happen even with a majority government. So if your party has 170 seats or more and you've got a majority government, technically you could still be given a vote of non-confidence, but that never really happens because what usually happens, what the expectation is that if you are a Liberal MP and you have a Liberal Prime Minister, you always vote for the Liberal Prime Minister because you're from the same party. If you've got a Conservative Prime Minister and you are a Conservative MP, you'll always vote in favor of your Conservative Prime Minister. That's your job. That's the expectation. We call that party discipline. You do what the party tells you to do. Um, so let's pretend that I'm the Prime Minister and you were an MP from my party. And if I want to pass a bill or a budget, I'm expecting that you'll vote in favor of my proposal. I'm expecting, I'm almost demanding that you do that. Because if you don't, and I find out, and I'm going to find out, I'm going to punish you. If you vote against me and we're from the same party and I'm your prime minister, I can do a few things with you. Number one, I can kick you right out of the party. I can do that if I want because you're being disloyal to the party. I'm the leader of the party. And so by doing that, if I kick you out of the party, you could maybe join another party or probably just sit as an independent. You would keep your seat in the House of Commons, but you'd have to sit as an independent because you're out of my party. You lose all of the money that my party's generated. It's tough for you to run your own campaign. I can pretty much end your political career if you vote against me. I can make you what is known as a backbencher if you vote against me. I literally make you sit at the back of the House of Commons. You don't get any time on TV, no radio interviews, things like that. I can almost make you disappear as an MP. And you may decide to cross the floor. So if you're kicked out of a party, or anytime you can do this if you want, actually, a party member, an MP, can cross the floor. They can quit, leave their one party, and they can go join another party. And you might do that if I kicked you out of my party. But what we're talking about is party discipline. You do what the party tells you to do as an MP. It wasn't supposed to be like that. The expectation was that you as an MP would serve your constituents, the people that voted for you. And if voting against your party leader as prime minister is what is best for your constituents, theoretically, that's what you should be doing. But usually MPs don't do that because they don't want to get in trouble with their prime minister or their party leader, and they're adhering to party discipline. So they go along and they do what the party wants them to do. And one could say that is not really democratic because it's not. That's not democracy. That's not how it was supposed to work. That's you looking after your own self interest as an MP as opposed to what is better for your constituency in riding. I can't think of much else to tell you about the structure of Canadian government. If you are a good, loyal party member, the party will pay you back through what is known as patronage. You might get a Senate seat one day based on patronage, and that's not really democratic either. Other things I wanted to point out. Here is the seat breakdown in the House of Commons. So as we talked about, 338 seats in total, and the seats are allocated based on population. And so you can see obviously Ontario gets the greatest amount of seats because of population. Quebec is second with 78. And so if you do the math, if Quebec and Ontario vote for one political party, they effectively have ended the election because between the two provinces, they have more than 170 seats in the House of Commons. And so, quite often in Canadian elections, once Ontario, Quebec vote for whatever party and they win the election, it doesn't really matter what happens in the West because we don't have enough seats to change the result of that election. And a lot of people call that Western alienation. What's the point in Alberta and Manitoba, Saskatchewan voting? We never get what we want anyway. We don't really have a say in federal politics. Some people have gone so far as to call for separatist movements. The current Buffalo Declaration from Alberta is a provincial call for Alberta to break away from Canada and either declare sovereignty or form a union with some other country or province. We're not on the verge of that happening, but you can understand where those sentiments might come from if you never feel like you're getting what you want out of federal politics. Maybe people would think about breaking away. The territories each get one, and based on population, they probably shouldn't even get that much, but you can't give someone half a seat or a quarter of a seat, so they give them a seat each. Another allocation. That's an old one. Here's the 2015 election. So the Justin Trudeau's first victory. Anything in red is Liberal, blue is Conservative, green is green, the block is kind of a teal cover. Democrats are orange. So you can see that the Liberals won that election by a wide margin. If you look at the seat allocation in 2015, the Trudeau government won 184 seats. You only need 170 for a majority government, so they were quite easily a majority government in 2015. Really easy to pass policy and legislation. Alberta, Saskatchewan always vote Conservative. That was the 2015 election. And in looking at that election, here's a different way of looking at it. The Liberals won 184 seats. And this is going to confuse you, but I'll come back and fix this later. Liberals won 184 seats. They won 54% of the seats as a percentage. But they only got 39.5% of the popular vote. And we'll talk, that's a separate lesson we're going to cover later on. But the way we allocate seats in the House of Commons isn't always indicative of what we call the popular vote. So nationwide, only 39.5% of Canadians voted for the Liberals, but they got 54% of the seats in the House of Commons. They got their majority government. Mathematically, they probably shouldn't have. And we'll come back later and talk about how that happens. There's the 2015 provincial election. Here's the 2019 federal election. Liberals lost a lot of seats in this one. So if we look at our map, you can see that the Western provinces by and large went blue. Liberals didn't get a single seat in Alberta or Saskatchewan. They still dominate Ontario and Quebec and most of Eastern Canada. But what I really want to point out is this. So in the 2019 election, the Liberals got 33% of the popular vote. And they get to form the next government. But the Conservatives actually got 34% of the popular vote. So based on the way we give out seats, the Liberals won that election. But in terms of a nationwide popular vote, more people actually voted for the Conservative Party. So if this had been Western Europe, the Conservatives would have won that election. And we'll talk about how that happens, more later on. But the Liberals lost a lot, like they were down several percentage points from the 2015 election. And that's how they also get their minority government. Yeah, here's what I'm looking for. So right now, today in Canada, the Liberals have 157 seats, well short of the 170 that you need for a majority government. Conservatives are second with 121 seats in the House of Commons. The Bloc has 32 seats in the House of Commons. But the Conservatives won with the popular vote. But just the way we give out seats, the Liberals win that election. Separate lesson. I know you're confused by this. I'll come back later and make sure that all of this is cleared up. Okay. I guess we're done with that.